Thank you, Marie, for the scripture, and thank you, D'Artagnan, for jumping up and being there. We are talking this morning about extravagant welcome. I think we all have a good idea of what welcome means: hospitality, invitation, kindness, compassion, a sense of joy when you wrap your arms around someone in a loving embrace. And I think we all know what extravagance means. It's over and above. It is beyond what is ever expected. And so when we talk about extravagant welcome, we're not just talking about the ways in which we generally welcome a stranger on the street, or greeting someone with a handshake or a hello. We're talking about something that goes beyond that expectation. What are the ways in which we experience extravagant welcome in our own lives? Ways in which we are welcomed by someone who loves us so dearly that they go through all lengths to welcome us and to really give us a sense of joy and friendship. It is my hope that during this holiday season of Thanksgiving that you might experience and think about what extravagant welcome means in your own household and in your own community. It's odd this morning that I get to preach about extravagant welcome using the lectionary text that comes from the Gospel of Matthew, which is about talents, and ends with the master slave owner who is very ferociously angry at the one servant who does not invest the talents. Rather, that servant buries them in the ground. And the master is so angry at this servant and sends him out from his sight, out into the darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. So I thought I would balance that out with our other reading from Romans chapter 15, in which Paul the Apostle writes, "For us to welcome one another, therefore, just as Christ has welcomed you, for the glory of God." These two scriptures kind of give us some sort of a paradoxical balance. In Romans, we are seeing this extravagant love and hospitality that we are so familiar with here in our United Church of Christ, Congregational church, and we know what that extravagant welcome means. We welcome all into this space, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey. Indeed, our denomination has been on the forefront of extravagant welcome for a long time. In the 1800s, being the first American denomination to ordain an African-American man and a woman. We were the first denomination in the 1970s to ordain an openly gay man out in San Francisco. We were a denomination that voted overwhelmingly in 2005 to support same-sex marriage and to encourage greater dialogue in the ways in which we welcome all in our midst, no matter who you are. We are a denomination that had the first black man who was the president of our denomination that was predominantly white. We are a denomination that is continually seeking to be diverse and multicultural, to welcome the stranger in our midst in ways that are extravagant, that goes beyond just the normal how do you do type of welcome. So I struggled a little bit this morning when I knew that I was preaching on this Matthew text in which the focus of the text is on the way that the master treats the slave who does nothing with the talent that the slave has been given. Although what I want to do for you is shift your thinking about how this text runs. What we see in this text is not just the berating of a servant who did nothing with the talent that they were given, but rather we see in this how fear overwhelms the servant. The servant is afraid of the master. He's terrified that if he loses anything, that his master will be harsh with him. We see a master who is angry about the ways that the servant does not do anything with the money. So it's a story about the ways in which fear and anger take over our lives. When we are afraid to be extravagant or hospitable, like the third servant who hid his money, his treasure, his talents in a hole in the ground, then we are living into the fear that is sometimes so prevalent in our world. Rather, what Jesus wants us to understand by telling this parable is not that God's wrath will be upon us when we fail to do something glorious for God. Rather, that if we live in fear, fear will consume us. Anger will turn into our reward. Fear and anger are cyclical, and they come around and around again, and we see this all the time in our lives, in our politics, in our community, vengefulness and anger. Rather, what Jesus wants us to live into is what Paul describes in the Romans text. God's extravagant welcome and love. For, as Paul explains, Christ welcomed us. Paul says, I tell you that Christ has become a servant of all on behalf of the truth of God in order that Christ might confirm the promises given to the patriarchs, in order that the Gentiles might glorify God for God's mercy. For Jesus became a servant to all, so that God could be magnified and glorified. Christ did not please himself. So Jesus, as Paul tells us, is a model for how we do extravagant welcome. It is by being humble and hospitable to those in our midst. It is like those other two servants who invest what they have been given and then return that to the one who those gifts were given in the first place. When I was much younger than I was today, I took a time to travel around Europe, and I spent a couple of months in London, England, and in Swansea, Wales, and in Edinburgh, Scotland. And there happened to be about a week of travel time in which I didn't have anything scheduled. And I was trying to decide what I should do with that time. And I was having a conversation over email with my mom. And she recommended that I look into some friends of my uncle who lived in Wales. So I got this phone number and contact information for the Housins, who were this wonderful couple who lived in North Wales. And I called them and I said, hey, I've got about a week of time that I'm not doing anything. Would it be okay if I came and made a visit to you? And David Husin, the husband, was just so thrilled that I would call. And he said, oh my gosh, of course. You're Bill's son or nephew. Please come on over. We'll pick you up at the train station. We'll feed you and house you and take good care of you. So I was picked up in this beautiful old English car from the station and taken to this beautiful estate out in North Wales. And I had the time of my life. From the moment I walked into the door, the home was inviting and welcoming. They brought me right into the kitchen, gave me something to drink, sat me down at the table. We had a feast. Not just your normal average meal of the day. David had gone out to their beehives on the property and cut out some honeycomb. And I had real bees' honey in the honeycomb for the first time in my life. It was so delicious. We had desserts, hot pie that David's wife had baked earlier that morning. Not because she wanted an average meal, but because she wanted something extravagant. She wanted something that was over and beyond whatever I would expect. And then we had stories and laughter and reminiscing and we talked about all sorts of things way into the night. And then the next day, David asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I'd love to just see more of this beautiful land. And we went out into the countryside. We hiked for miles and saw sheep, and I got to wear galoshes and got very muddy. And then we got back to the house, and David said, now, Jeffrey, I understand that you're here as a guest in our home, and I was wondering if you would be willing to travel with us for a noontime worship service at our local church. And I really liked the idea because I've been visiting lots of churches during my time in London, and I didn't have much time to actually go to worship. So I said yes. And it's a moment that I'll never forget. Going to this beautiful cathedral, and it happened to be just David and his wife and myself, and the rector of the Church of England, who was presiding over that noontime service. This is a huge cathedral in North Wales, and there were probably about 5 or 6 tours going on at the time. People looking at the old stained glass windows, and the statues, and the organ, and the beautiful handmade pews. And there were the 4 of us in the middle of this giant sanctuary, just the 4 of us having worship together. And we sat, and we prayed, and we stood, and we sang, and we said, glory to God. Glory to God in the highest. And I remember leaving and having a conversation with the Housans in their car as we went back to their home, and I said, thank you so much for inviting me into this sacred space. And I said, I say sacred space not to mean church, but to encompass all that you have provided for me this past couple of days. From the moment I crossed that threshold into your car, and into your home, and into your kitchen, and sat at your table, and talked with you, and sat in your living room, and enjoyed the fire and the warmth of the hearth of your home, that was all to be expected. But what was not expected was your invitation for me to go with you to church, to be with you in your community, to experience the love that you experience on a day-to-day basis. I said, thank you so much. I needed to have that experience. Because if no one had invited me into that space, it would have been an experience that I would have missed. I relish that I got to hold hands and sing and celebrate and know God in a very completely different way than the other ways that I had experienced God in my life. And I always remember fondly standing in the middle of that giant cathedral, just bask in the warmth of the stained glass windows, the light that beamed down upon us. And here, there were probably hundreds of people milling around, touring this ancient cathedral, learning all about the ways in which people understood and built this church and celebrated God. But there we were, actually celebrating love, and community, and kindness, and extravagant love. I remember writing to the Housans after I had left, and I said, of all the things that I have done during my travels around Europe, your few days that I spent with you will stand out as some of the most memorable and wonderful, because it was beyond anything that I had ever expected. What happened for me in the moments that I experienced with the Housans, that sacred space that I entered into, was a repetition of little rituals that they had been practicing and rehearsing and living into all the days of their life. These were rituals that they picked up from their parents and their grandparents, from their faith tradition, from the church that said, invite the stranger into your midst. These were all rituals that they wanted to share with me. And so on this day, I think of how we leave fear behind and live into joy and love and compassion is by the ways in which we rehearse and practice our rituals. This coming Thursday, many of us are going to practice some rituals that mean a lot to us. I wonder, what are the things that you do in your own home that are rituals for you? What are the ways in which you welcome people into your home? Or maybe, what is the way that you enter into another person's home and express your gratitude and thanksgiving? Could be taking off your shoes. It could be offering your favorite beverage, a tea, or a glass of water. It could be taking them on a tour of the home so that that might be familiar to them as they explore and get to know you even better. This Thanksgiving, I hope that we will move out of the places of fear and move into the places of extravagant welcome. Just as I was welcomed by the Housans in a foreign land that was unfamiliar to me, even though I had spent some time there before going to the Housans' home, they showed me a depth and a level of love, and a sense of home that I would not have gotten anywhere else on my journey. When I was out and about this last week, I spent a moment and I went to one of our representatives' offices here in Grand Junction. And I went with several other clergy, and we went to go talk with the representative's office to encourage legislation that would make it more hospitable for those who are immigrants or refugees. Some of you are familiar with what is called DACA, which means it's a deferred action on those who came in as child immigrants. And oftentimes when people come into our country, they bring their children with them, and for whatever reason it might be, those people come in illegally perhaps. The family gets deported, and oftentimes the children are deported with the family. And it can cause a lot of stress on our young folks. What happens is that we have a lot of college-age youth. We have 20, 30-somethings who came into this country not by their own will, but because of their parents, and are now trying to find a way that they can legally call this place their home. For truly, this is the only home that they've known. So I felt it was important to go and express to our representatives how important it is that our policies and our economics and our history here in Grand Junction of being a welcoming place to immigrants and refugees continues on. That we say yes to the stranger in our midst, just as Jesus asks us to. We are told over and over in biblical texts that it is right and simple and clear to respond to the immigrant and the stranger with a wide, extravagant welcome. It is a clarion call, in fact, throughout the Old Testament. And even in our gospel text, we think of the prodigal son and how the father welcomed the son who was lost back with a warm embrace. What I want to offer those who are strangers and immigrants and refugees, in fact, all who are sojourning on this life, is a place to call home. Even though it may not be the home they came from, it can be a sense of sacred, holy home for them here and now. It's the way that the Housans invited me into their place, their sacred space. It wasn't just their home and it wasn't just their church, but it was their community of life and love. If we could offer that same sense of home to one another, we would be like the two servants who took what God had given them, invested it, and seen it come back to them overflowing to give back to those who are in need and in want, to be the servants as Jesus has asked us to be. What are the rituals of extravagant welcome that we can entertain this holiday season? And may that be our thanksgiving here and now, to turn our home into the home of others, to make them feel extravagantly welcome. This is God's call and ask and task for us this day. May we be agents of extravagant welcome this day, now and forever. Amen.